One of the most common questions regarding Trove, or more like any game in general, is to see which is going to be the best character or strategy that is going to be available in the game. In some games, this can be a huge difference, mainly like competitive games. In some, not so much. Trove is just one of those games that in reality the best class for you is to use is going to be the one that you like the most, since this is going to be a game that will test your true patience or dedication that you do have in this game. However, despite all of that, a lot of people do wonder which is still going to be the most effective or efficient class in the game based on other players' opinions and preferences. Today, I will be sharing my own personal opinion on which is going to be the best all-around class in the game. And this class is going to be the Shadowhunter. First of all, I just need to mention that this is going to be purely an opinionated or preference type video, and no, you should not change this class because of this video. Once again, use the class that suits better for your playstyle and preferences. If you're using a class solely because it is good, you are not going to go far in this game because you are not going to enjoy this game as much. Anyways, I did ask this question in the community tab. Frankly speaking, not a lot of people did end up answering that question, and I'm going to ask that question once again. And that is going to be, what is the best class in the game based on your own personal opinion and why? List that in the comment section down below. Now, I talked to a lot of endgame players, newer players, and a lot of different types of players to think which is going to be the best class in the entirety of the game based on their own personal opinion. Some of them were somewhat expected, like Lunar Lancer, Boomeranger, and stuff like that. Some definitely not expected, like Tomb Racer, what? But the majority agreed that the best class in the entirety of the game is the Shadowhunter, whether they like the class or not. So personally, how I view an overall class is going to be how good is the class from the moment that you do pick it up all the way until you do reach the end of the game, and how effective or consistent the class is going to be at all portions of the game, including all types of content. Obviously, of course, I do value certain contents more than others. Like for example, I'm not going to judge a character just how good the character can be in Bomber Royale, because first of all, not a lot of players plays Bomber Royale, and secondly, like pretty much every single character is just as effective. The only thing that it makes difference is the dodge. Outside of that, like Bomber Royale is such a small thing that you will do it throughout your whole journey. But stuff like dungeon grinding or maybe bossing, those are stuff that I will consider to be more valuable in terms of like how good the character can be overall. The Shadowhunter, while it's not number one in every single category, not even close in certain categories, but the class is just consistently either above average or top of the line in most cases or content. That's usually where I value the Shadowhunter to be probably the best character in the game. So first of all, let's start talking about probably the weakest part of the character, and that is going to be the very beginning. The Shadowhunter struggles heavily without the class gem ability. Having a slow basic attack, as a matter of fact, is tied for the slowest basic attack in the game. Also, while being mainly, for the most part, single target, it can go through enemies, but for the most part, it's just a straight line. There's not a lot of AoE. All of that while having pretty good abilities, but they require a little bit of setup to be effective. Shadow Seekers require the Seekers from the passive ability to actually do damage. Snail doesn't have the highest damage output. It has really good crowd control and AoE, but 3.5 times damage multiplier in the beginning is not that good because abilities you want to be either one-shotting or just killing the enemies rather quickly. Snail is unfortunately not one unless you're doing low portals. On top of all of it, Snail costs 65 energy, which is a lot, especially if you don't have energy regeneration. And the ultimate ability, Sacred Arrow, is also pretty good, but it is still an ultimate ability with one of the longest cooldowns in the game with 45 seconds. In the beginning of the game, basic attack will reign supreme amongst everything. Well, for the most part, most of the entirety of the game, basic attacks are better, but basic attack in the early portions of the game will reign supreme because there are no cooldown, no setup required, instant cast ability, and for the most part, it's going to be your fastest attack. A slow basic attack is usually not that good for the beginning portions of the game, but everything changes once you actually get the class gem ability, because that's when the class just becomes the Shadowhunter essentially. Going from the slowest basic attack in the entirety of the game to the fastest basic attack in the entirety of the game with no attack speed requirement. This is huge considering the early game getting max attack speed can be quite tough, and this class can shoot 3 to 5 times faster than all classes in the entirety of the game while still retaining a 2 times damage multiplier ability. So, to put it into a perspective, 2 times damage multiplier is the same damage multiplication as the Boomeranger's basic attack on both melee and bow. So 2 times damage on 12 attacks per second is really good, especially in the early game. Combine that having a fast basic attack is really good for not having 100% critical hit, which is obviously, of course, once again, really good in the early game. And while getting 100% critical hit can be quite easy, it's still something to note. The other thing is going to be that brings this class name is ease of use. The class just becomes absolutely easy. Just all be real about it. It's just very easy to pick up and play and just be effective. This is very important since most classes require cooldown reduction, energy regeneration, have high enough stat to one-shot to be efficient, and this class is just point and shoot. And which is extremely good because it means that you can just be effective from the beginning all the way to the end because the basic attack is everything. Outside of all of that, the abilities still retain the effectiveness because the ability will work as utility abilities rather than your main damage source, and that is going to be really huge for this character in particular because it means that you can just use the basic attack for the majority of the content, and if you really want to do extra damage, you can just end up using all the abilities like Shadow Seeker, Sun Snares, and your Sacred Arrow. And to top it all of it, the character just retains that consistency throughout the whole entirety of the game. Dungeon grinding is probably going to be the thing that you will be doing the most, and this character just retains just effectiveness throughout the whole entirety of the game for dungeon grinding. Early game is obviously really good because you don't need 100% critical hit. Once you do reach 100% critical hit, the character still retains like one of the strongest basic attack in terms of pure DPS in the entirety of the game. And once again, you can use all the other abilities. I made a whole video regarding the abilities and how important they can be for the Shadowhunter, and those abilities are just going to be very important if you're struggling a little bit on damage. Like Shadow Seeker can do upwards of 45 times damage multiplier, which even in the earliest portions of the game, that's like pretty much almost a guaranteed one shot. That's almost 3 times the amount of damage of a Candy Barbarian ultimate ability, which is ridiculous to think about. And then you have the ultimate ability, which does damage over time, which can just help you out and just dishing out damage against bosses. And the Sun Snare, like I just mentioned, once you actually have enough stats for you to actually hit all enemies, Sun Snare is just going to be a one-shot and killing machine, which is going to retain effectiveness the higher the stat that you actually do get, which is important because it means that all of the abilities just become more and more effective the higher stat that you do become, especially abilities like Sun Snare. And then you have abilities that will cover the early portions of the game, like Shadow Seekers and your ultimate ability. So you have ability that will cover everything while retaining the consistency of the basic attack. Obviously, another of the weaknesses of the character that I just need to mention is going to be the crowd control. If you don't one-shot with like Sun Snare and you don't have the ultimate ability, then obviously crowd control can be quite a pain, which is obviously slightly less effective for Delve floor clearing. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty substantial drawback, but it's not going to make the class unplayable for the most part. You can still be effective with the Shadowhunter for the most part on that. And the other thing is that a lot of people just say is bossing. I need to mention this once again, the Shadowhunter is not the same as it used to be pre-rework. The character before the rework used to be a critical damage movement speed type of character. The Shadowhunter right now is much more effective with attack speed and energy regeneration if you want the full effectiveness of the character. Obviously, attack speed is only if you're using the character for bossing. The reason being is because the ultimate ability, the Sacred Arrow, relies on having high attack speed because it has the same animations as the no class gen basic attack. So the more attack speed that you do have, the faster you're going to shoot with that ultimate ability. And if you do have energy regeneration, it means that you can just throw down more arrows. And since that is a damage over time, it is a stacking damage over time, mind you. It means that you can just keep throwing all of those things down, and with the hidden effect Tactical Seekers, it also helps out with more DPS. The Shadowhunter is much better in terms of DPS than a lot of people give it credit, because a lot of people just tend to use the character in terms of just pure basic attack. That's not the case. The character DPS mainly comes from the ultimate ability stacking damage over time. That ability does a lot of damage, and you will be using that a lot if you want to do a lot of DPS. Now the character all around just becomes effective at all things in the game, and I don't need to just mention the strongest part of the character, that is speed farming. So speed farming is what makes the Shadowhunter just absolutely ridiculous and just take it over the top, because all of those things that I mentioned regarding the basic attack abilities and all of that, all of those are just not the most effective part of the character. The most effective part of the character is just going to be the speed farming, because while retaining, pretty good DPS, still maintaining like consistency throughout the entirety of the game. The character is still, in my opinion, the best speed farming character in the entirety of the game, especially once you do reach into the end game. Having a basic attack that not only is the fastest basic attack in the entirety of the game, it's the only basic attack that can shoot through walls. Combine all of that with a movement speed buff of plus 40%, which is absolutely unnecessary in my own personal opinion, but essentially no cooldown, no setup requirement, and it is tied to your dodge that is already really good on the Shadowhunter, giving you forward momentum. Combine all of those things that I just mentioned with Shadow Seeker and all of the abilities, and combine that with a character that can just reach 40% movement speed increase, and to top it all of it, just maintaining pure effectiveness while still being extremely easy to use. Very effective and still being one of the fastest characters in the game while still retaining one of the highest DPS in the game. Once you actually do get the class gem ability, the class just becomes consistent. You can just use your ability to help out in just destroying enemies if you struggle a little bit in damage. Like once you actually start reaching into the higher damage, abilities like Snail become more effective because the damage is just not going to be a big of an issue, and the AoE is just going to cover most of the enemies, and that is a huge deal because AoE can be one of the problems with this particular character. And then once you actually start reaching into the higher stat, the DPS is still consistent and pretty good, and it becomes really effective and really fast. It's just so overtuned on its own that it pretty much just dwarfs most of the characters in the entirety of the game. So let's take some of the examples of some of the other characters to put it into a perspective. Boomeranger is considered to some players the best character in the game. Widely so, is a starter class that is extremely effective in terms of just pure damage output. But the thing is, it's just that. It's pure damage and DPS. The character is not really that good in dungeon grinding. It's actually below average in terms of dungeon grinding comparable to a lot of the characters. You can still be effective, like I just mentioned, but Boomeranger is comparable to most of the characters, especially the Shadowhunter, is not even close. In terms of like AoE is really good because especially once you do get Blast Bow actually just helps you out with AoE, which is an advantage. But the thing is, Boomeranger relies on cooldown reduction, relies on also just having pretty good luck if you want the highest burst DPS in the entirety of the game. And to top of all of it, it requires you to have a lot of enemies to do a lot of damage with Blast Bow. Because let me just tell you a little bit about Blast Bow. A lot of people are kind of overrating a little bit on Blast Bow. Blast Bow doesn't do a lot of damage on its own. It's only 1 times damage extra on top of the 2 times damage from the regular basic attack. 3 times damage multiplier on 1.25 base attacks per second is not particularly great. To put it into a perspective, the Shadowhunter, I believe, without the class gem, is 3.75 times damage multiplier with 1 attacks per second. So it's slightly slower with slightly higher damage. So in terms of effectiveness in single target, Blast Bow against 1 enemy is just around the same effectiveness as the no class gem Shadowhunter. And that's just how it is. That's just numbers. I'm not saying this as an opinion. Those are the actual numbers. But the thing is like, Blast Bow, the more enemies that you do have, obviously the more effective it becomes because it's a no cooldown explosion. To top it all of it, the Blast Bow requires you to hit the enemy. It's not like the Dino Tamer where you shoot, like just shooting will give you the AoE. You have to hit the enemy to get the AoE. And considering that the basic attack arrow is 1 arrow, is 1 enemy, unless the enemies are clumped up together, you're not going to get multiple explosions, just 1 explosion for the most part. And once again, 1 times damage multiplier is not a whole lot. Now, the chickens, while doing ridiculous amounts of damage, they are not extremely effective for speed farming because they take 1.5 seconds to fully detonate so you can get the chickens. Versus the Shadowhunter, where he can complete objective in less than a second, like pretty easily. So by the time that the Boomeranger is going to take to destroy the bomb to get the chickens, the Shadowhunter could easily just destroy the dungeon, move on to the next dungeon while retaining higher movement speed. On top of all of it, the ultimate ability, which is where the big burst damage comes into play, is reliant on random chances, where some cases you can just get ridiculously lucky and just get multi-earn and just get multiple explosion and just absolutely delete a boss. In some cases you might only get like the cooldown gens or the healing gens, and it might not be just effective and the ultimate ability is essentially a waste. It relies on chances, on cooldown reduction, and it also is not the fastest character out there, and it relies on having a lot of enemies just to be effective with the basic attack, because without it, not that great. And then we move on to the Luna Lancer. It's faster than the Shadowhunter, but it's much more inconsistent. It does have really good DPS, but it relies on you having to hit the enemy multiple times with basic, so you spawn a lot of minions so you can actually just do a lot of DPS. Combine that with that you do rely on just maintaining ultimate ability. And not only that, all of those 2 classes can be a little bit more difficult to be effective comparable to the Shadowhunter. Keep this thing in mind that the Shadowhunter is just very easy to use. You can literally just use basic attack and dodge and just be effective for most of the content in the entirety of the game, and not to mention that's on everything from beginning to the end. Use this character from the beginning to the end on my PC account after the rework, and it was probably the easiest experience that I've ever done. Getting a character to 40,000 power rank and powering up is absolutely ridiculous. Yes, it doesn't do the highest amounts of damage like Boomerang or Solarian and all of that. Yes, it doesn't have the best AoE like your Ice Age and your Revenants, and also with Blast Bows and Dino Tamer and stuff like that. But the character is just either above average in terms of everything, or in the case of dungeon grinding, is the best class in the entirety of the game. And this is the reason why the Shadowhunter, in my opinion, is the best class in the game. I can go on and on and on and on and on. There's plenty of more to me to just talk about the Shadowhunter in general. For example, all of the mechanics that you can just do with jump dodging, jump shooting, all of that, like I've already mentioned in multiple videos, which increases the effectiveness of the class just even further. But like the character is just a character that it becomes extremely easy to just be good and farming most of the stuff because of 40 block basic attack range that can go through blocks. It means that you can just easily just point in the general direction and you are going to hit an enemy. Not to mention in low portals, it's just absolutely busted and broken. And the character, like with a boss radar, if you're playing on PC, you can literally just ping enemies through walls. I have used this character on PC on the test server to see how fast I can go, and I went as far as 500 dungeons per hour, sustainable, by the way. A sustainable 500 dungeons per hour on low portals in U8 in topside. It's ridiculous. It is really fast. It's still really effective while still being very easy to use, and a class that you can just use from the beginning portions of the game all the way until the end game and still be effective. Thanks for watching. Thank you for sticking around as always. Leave a like, sub for more content like this. Once again, leave a comment in the comment section down below which is the best class in the entirety of the game in your own personal opinion and why. Once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care and keep on hunting.